French President Emmanuel Macron visited Notre Dame Cathedral as its interior was unveiled for the first time since its devastating fire.
Thousands of Italian workers took to the streets this Friday to protest the government's new budget plan.
At a security summit in Kazakhstan, Putin threatened to hit the Ukrainian capital with recently deployed intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Keir Starmer says he'll overhaul the immigration system after new data shows arrivals to the country hit a record high.
French President Emmanuel Macron visited Notre Dame Cathedral as its interior was unveiled for the first time after being closed for more than 5 years following a devastating fire. Accompanied by his wife Brigitte, they entered through the cathedral's giant front doors and gazed up at the ceilings in wonder. France's national treasure is set to reopen its doors to the public on December 8th, even though the exterior of the monument remains a construction site with cranes and scaffolding. The cathedral had been left with gaping holes in the ceilings caused by the fire, which stone masons were able to fix. The French president will return on December the 7th to attend the consecration of the new altar and offer a speech during a solemn mass the following day. His administration is presenting the cathedral's reconstruction as a symbol of French can-do attitude and national unity.
Nurses, teachers and thousands of other public and private sector employees in Italy took to the streets on Friday to protest the government's new budget plan. Workers say salaries are not high enough to keep up with inflation and that there has been a decline in spending power and government policies.
La maggioranza delle lavoratrici e dei lavoratori non arriva a 1.500 euro, parliamo di impiegati, di maestre, di insegnanti, lavoratrici e lavoratori dell'industria. Con questa manovra si avrà un peggioramento delle condizioni fino a 200 euro l'anno e pensare che solo nell'ultimo anno il carrello della spesa è aumentato di più del 20%. Ecco, questi sono dati che dicono con chiarezza che bisogna dare risposte per aumentare i salari e permettere alla gente che lavora di poter far fronte ai propri bisogni.
Unionists also asked for new hires and the stabilization of employees with temporary contracts in hospitals and schools.
Ecco perché poi c'è una moria di personale che va all'estero proprio perché gli stipendi sono troppo bassi. Quindi noi chiediamo che gli stipendi vengano rialzati, vengano firmati i contratti della sanità pubblica e privata.
But Premier Giorgia Meloni has repeatedly said that the core of her government's economic measures are tax cuts rather than subsidies.
Russian President Vladimir Putin threatened to strike Ukrainian capital Kyiv with recently unveiled Oreshnik missiles, as he praised US President-elect Donald Trump as quite clever and experienced. He made the comments during a news conference on the sidelines of a security summit alliance of former Soviet nations in Kazakhstan.
Но по значительным целям будем применять те средства, которые есть в нашем распоряжении, в том числе, я об этом тоже сказал, не исключаем и использование орешника по военным, по объектам военной промышленности, либо по центрам принятия решения, и в Киеве в том числе.
While at the summit, Russia's leader also praised incoming US President Donald Trump.
Возможна версия, что действующая администрация хочет создать для будущей дополнительные сложности. Такое тоже возможно. Но насколько я себе представляю, вновь избранного президента, он все-таки человек умный и достаточно уже опытный.
Moscow has launched intensifying attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure recently, with Trump's victory casting uncertainty over the future of Ukraine.
Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov visited North Korea this Friday to discuss further cooperation between the two countries. In a meeting with his North Korean counterpart, No Kwan-cho, Belousov said military support between Moscow and Pyongyang is expanding. He also added that an agreement signed by Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in June is aimed at, quote, stabilizing Northeast Asia, including reducing the risk of nuclear war.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said the government will overhaul the immigration system after new data showed arrivals to the country had hit a record high. Figures released by the Office for National Statistics put net migration at more than 900,000 in the year to June 2023. Starmer blamed those numbers on the previous Conservative government.
Because a failure on this scale isn't just bad luck, it isn't a global trend or taking your eye off the ball. No, this is a different order of failure. This happened by design, not accident. Policies were reformed deliberately to liberalise immigration. Brexit was used for that purpose, to turn Britain into a one-nation experiment in open borders.
Starmer said his government plans to overhaul the points-based immigration system brought in by the Conservatives in 2021 after Brexit. That system gives applicants points for specific skills and qualifications, and those who don't meet the threshold aren't granted a visa. Immigration is a divisive topic in the UK, with many voters concerned about the strain on public services caused by a large influx of people. But some sectors, including healthcare, argue they'd be unable to function without staff brought in from abroad.
Thousands of Georgians have protested outside the parliament in Tbilisi after Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze announced a suspension in the country's EU accession bid. There were clashes between police and protesters, with officers using water cannons and deploying right teams to quell the unrest. Kobakidze's decision to stop accession talks until 2028 came just hours after the European Parliament adopted a resolution rejecting the country's election results, citing major irregularities. But the people of Georgia are determined to continue making their voices heard until their demands are met.
They are going against Georgian people's will and they want to drag us back to USSR, but that will never happen because Georgian people will never let this happen.
The European Parliament said the country should rerun its election under international supervision within a year. The bloc also announced a cut in budgetary support to Georgia, a measure lawmakers say could be detrimental to the country.
They will not receive any funding from EU, which means that they will block 100 million devoted to Georgian civil society and media. They're going to suffocate whatever pockets of freedom are left in this country.
Kobakidze accuses Brussels of blackmail and says his government will work to implement the necessary reforms to resume accession talks. He said that by 2028, Georgia will be the most prepared country among all candidates to join the bloc in the year 2030.
Voting began Friday morning in Ireland's parliamentary elections, which will decide the country's next government and show whether Ireland bucks the global trend of incumbents being ousted by disgruntled voters after years of pandemic, instability and economic pressure. Housing and the cost of living are two topics at the forefront of voters' minds as they head to the polls. Ireland has an acute housing shortage. Despite being one of the wealthiest countries in Europe, rents have soared. Many young people can't afford a place of their own. The proportion of young people struggling to afford housing costs is amongst the highest in Europe. Coupled with the housing crisis, rising immigration is another topic driving discontentment with establishment centre-right political parties like Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. About 20% of Ireland's population was born outside Ireland, and 120,000 foreigners moved to Ireland in the year to April, the biggest number since 2007. The country of 5.4 million has struggled to house all the asylum seekers, leading to tension and protests. The main political parties are trying to diffuse the discontentment, touting plans to get a grip on immigration and build many more houses. Analysts say the most likely election outcome of this vote is another alliance between establishment parties Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil.
Sweden has formally asked China to cooperate with an investigation into the suspected sabotage of 2 data cables running under the Baltic Sea. The fibre optic cables, one running from Finland to Germany and the other from Lithuania to Sweden, were damaged last week in an area where the Chinese bulk carrier Yipeng 3 had been seen.
With this request, obviously we think it's extremely important to find out exactly what had happened, and of course we expect also China to comply with the request we have sent to China.
The Yipeng 3 is currently anchored in international waters between Sweden and Denmark, where it's being monitored by several vessels, including those belonging to the Danish Navy. The Wall Street Journal reported that investigators suspect the Yipeng 3 of deliberately severing the fibre optic cables by dragging its anchor along the seabed. Authorities in Beijing said they had no information about the ship and denied any responsibility.
中方对于处理此类的事故一直是秉持合作的态度。目前我们同相关方的沟通协调工作正在推进中。
Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk said this wasn't the first time suspected sabotage had happened in the Baltic Sea. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, which carried gas from Russia to Germany, were both damaged in explosions in 2022. And in 2023, the Baltic connector gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia was seriously damaged.